A man once traveled a great distance to ask a teacher how to save his marriage. "We have tried everything," he said. "We have talked and talked. We have explained ourselves 1,000 times, and every conversation ends in the same wall of silence and anger. There is nothing left to say." The teacher looked at him and said something strange. "You have spent years talking. Perhaps the problem is that no one has been listening." The man started to object. Of course he listened. He listened all the time, but then he stopped, because somewhere underneath his certainty, a small and terrible suspicion had begun to stir. And if you have ever sat across from someone you love and felt that vast, exhausting distance between you, the kind that no amount of talking ever seems to close, then that same suspicion is about to stir in you too. So let me ask you what the teacher was really asking. In all those conversations, all those arguments, all those 1,000 explanations, were you ever actually listening, or were you only waiting to speak? Stay with me, because the thing that is breaking your relationship is almost never the thing you think it is, and the repair can begin faster than you would ever believe, not in years of therapy, but in something you could start tonight. Here is the first illusion, and it is the one almost every struggling relationship is built on. You believe the problem is a lack of communication, so you communicate more. You explain your side again. You clarify what you really meant. You correct their misunderstanding of you. You marshal your evidence. You state your case. You defend your position, and they do exactly the same thing back. Two people talking endlessly, each one fighting to be understood, and not one drop of understanding flowing in either direction. Because what you have been calling communication is not communication at all. It is two monologues colliding. You are not speaking to each other. You are speaking at each other, each waiting for the other to finally stop talking so you can resume your defense. And the more you do it, the more unheard you both feel, and the higher the wall between you grows. There is a teaching that cuts straight through this, and it comes from one of the deepest wells of mindfulness wisdom. It says, in any conflict, the deepest need of the other person is not to be corrected, or won, or fixed. It is to be understood, to have their suffering received by another human being. And almost no one, in marriages, in families, between parents and children, almost no one ever receives this. Which is why almost everyone, even surrounded by the people they love most, feels so profoundly, achingly alone. So here is the first practice, and it is the one that can begin to melt years of frozen conflict in a single conversation. It is called compassionate listening, and it is far harder and far more powerful than it sounds. Compassionate listening means you listen to another person with only one purpose: to relieve their suffering. Not to respond, not to defend yourself, not to correct the parts that are unfair or untrue, not to wait for the gap so you can finally say your piece. You listen with your whole being, with the single intention of letting the other person empty their heart. And here is the part that makes it almost unbearably difficult. The other person will say things that are wrong. They will say things that are unfair, distorted, exaggerated, things that paint you as the villain in a story you remember completely differently. And the practice is to keep listening anyway, to let them speak, even through the distortions, because you understand that this is a suffering human being trying to release their pain, and that you can hold space for that pain without needing, in that moment, to set the record straight. You can keep this single thought alive in your mind as you listen. I am listening to this person so that their suffering can be lessened. That one intention changes everything, because when someone is finally, truly heard, when they feel their pain land in another person's heart without judgment or defense, something in them softens that no argument could ever reach. But listening is only half of it. There is a second practice, and the two together are what make the repair possible. It is called loving speech. Loving speech does not mean lying. It does not mean swallowing your truth or pretending everything is fine. It means learning to speak your truth in a way the other person can actually receive, without blame, without accusation, without the sharp edge that makes them slam the door of their heart shut before your words even arrive. There is a simple, almost magical phrasing at the center of this. Instead of "you always ignore me, you never care about my feelings," which is an attack, and which guarantees the other person stops listening and starts defending. You learn to say, "When this happened, I felt hurt, I felt alone, and I may be wrong, so please help me understand." Do you feel the difference? One is an arrow aimed at the other person. The other is an honest confession of your own pain, offered with the humility that you might not have the whole picture. The first makes them your enemy. The second makes them your witness. The first builds the wall higher. The second opens a door in it. This is loving speech, telling the truth, but telling it with such care that the other person can stay open long enough to actually hear it. And now here is why 5 days is not a fantasy. You may have spent years building the wall between you, and it would be easy to assume it will take years to take down. But conflict does not work the way you think. The wall is not made of years. It is made of a single repeating pattern, performed over and over, every single day. The pattern of two people defending instead of listening, attacking instead of confessing, speaking at instead of to. Change the pattern, and the wall begins to fall almost immediately. Imagine 5 days. On the first day, you say nothing new. You simply listen fully, the way you have never listened before, to the person you have stopped hearing. You let them speak, and you do not defend. You just receive. On the second day, you do it again, and they begin cautiously to feel the difference, to feel received for the first time in years. By the third day, when you finally speak, you use loving speech. You offer your own pain instead of your accusations, and because they have felt heard, they can finally hear you back. By the fourth and fifth day, you are no longer two people defending fortresses. You are two suffering humans, slowly turning to face each other, recognizing the pain you have each been carrying alone. 5 days will not erase every wound, but 5 days is more than enough to crack the pattern that has held the wound in place. And once the pattern breaks, the healing, the real, deep healing, can finally begin. There is one more thing you need to understand, and it is the hardest of all. Before you can listen compassionately to anyone else, you have to learn to listen compassionately to yourself. Because the reason you cannot hear another person's pain is that you are so full of your own unheard suffering that there is no room left to receive theirs. The anger you feel toward the person who hurt you, underneath it is your own pain, your own fear, your own unmet need, crying out and never once being held. So begin there. Tonight, before you try this with anyone else, sit quietly and listen to your own suffering the way you would listen to a frightened child. Don't judge it. Don't fix it. Don't tell it to be reasonable. Just receive it. Say to the hurting part of yourself, "I know you are there. I know you are in pain. I am here and I am listening." Because the person who has learned to hold their own suffering with tenderness becomes, almost effortlessly, someone who can hold the suffering of others. And that, not winning, not being right, not finally making them understand your side, that is what saves a relationship that everyone else had given up for dead. So tomorrow, when you sit across from the person you love and have stopped hearing, try it. Say nothing in your own defense. Make no case, win no point. Just listen, with your whole heart, with the single wish to understand their pain, and let them feel, perhaps for the first time in years, what it is to be truly received by you. You have spent so long trying to be understood. Try, just for 5 days, to understand, and watch what happens to a wall you were certain would stand forever, when one person finally stops defending it and starts listening instead.